Welcome to another edition of Life, Love, and Philosophy. This is the fourth in a series of programs I'm doing on Ralph Waldo Emerson, arguably the greatest wisdom writer the United States has ever produced. Allow me a brief review of some of the main points I made in the first three segments of this series. I pointed out that Emerson was born in Boston in 1803. That was a few years after George Washington terminated his presidency. Emerson lived most of his life in Concord, Massachusetts, which was a hotbed of intellectualism. I've mentioned that Henry David Thoreau and the great writer Nathaniel Hawthorne also lived in Concord. Emerson had 2 degrees from Harvard University. In those days, it was called Harvard College. In fact, he got his bachelor's degree at age 18. He had entered Harvard at age 14. Emerson is well known for his lectures and his essays. He made his living as a lecturer, delivering about 80 lectures a year in various parts of the United States and also in Europe. And most of those lectures were eventually turned into essays. So if you want to read Emerson, the best thing to do is to go to a store like Barnes & Noble, and you can buy collections of his essays. Emerson is regarded as one of the greatest essayists who ever lived. And his essays are on a variety of life-enriching topics. He has essays on education, on friendship, on religion, etc. Emerson died in 1882 at the age of 78. Emerson often talked about what he considered to be the important purposes of human life. One of the most important purposes, according to Emerson, was that each of us attempt habitually to move to higher levels of awareness, higher levels of consciousness about ourselves and about life. In other words, he believed we should habitually be seeking a greater understanding of ourselves and a greater understanding of life. I myself have tried to follow Emerson's advice, and I found in so doing, my life has become more interesting and worthwhile. Emerson emphasized the power of ideas. A couple of quotes from Emerson which illustrate this posture of his. Emerson said this: "The ideas in a man's head make him what he is, and life consists in what a man is thinking about all day." He went on to say, and I'm quoting him, "The great turning points in life are not events, but moments of illumination." He went on to explain. He believed, again, the important turning points in life are not our choice of an occupation, our marriage, our purchase of a home, but rather the great turning points in our lives are thoughts. Thoughts which we have very often, new thoughts, which reverse our entire manner of living. Again, thoughts which reverse our entire manner of living. Both Emerson and Thoreau agreed on what is the highest of arts. Neither one of them believed that painting or sculpture or doctoring or teaching is the highest of arts. Rather, Thoreau put it rather succinctly when he said, "To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts." Emerson very much agreed with that. The idea is that the art of living is the highest of arts. Emerson often used the phrase self-cultivation, self-development. Another important theme of Emerson's lectures and essays was relationships, human relationships. For example, marriage, friendship. Emerson commented that relationships are often difficult. He believed that all relationships are imperfect, but nevertheless can still be valuable. Emerson believed that if we are to derive joy from our relationships, it's very important that we be very selective about whom we associate with. On the subject of friendship, Emerson distinguished between friends and acquaintances. Emerson believed that most people use the word friend rather loosely, when more accurately, they should have used the word acquaintance. Emerson believed that friendship, real friendship, involves a certain degree of intimacy, where acquaintanceship does not. Emerson believed that two elements go into the composition of a good friendship. The first, he claimed, was truth. Allow me to give you his own words. Emerson said this: "A friend is a person with whom I may be sincere. Before him I may think aloud. Before him I may think aloud." Besides truth and sincerity, Emerson believed the other important element in a friendship, if it's going to be a good one, is tenderness. That's his word. One could use the word affection. Emerson believed that if one is going to have a worthwhile friendship, it's very important that both parties to the friendship have the ability to express affection. With regard to the purposes of friendship, Emerson said the following, and again I'm quoting him. Again, friendship. "Friendship is for aid and comfort through all the passages of life and death. It is for serene days, but it's also for difficult times, for illness, poverty, and persecution." Emerson believed that the highest level of friendship is rare. Emerson believed that most of us often have unrealistic expectations about friendship. And he said this: "Friends such as we desire are but dreams and fables." He also went on to point out, since each of us is unique, all association, including friendship, must involve compromise. And finally, he said this, and again I'm quoting him: "We are armed all over with subtle antagonisms, which not infrequently play out when we come together." But, he maintained, despite all the difficulties in achieving a good friendship, Emerson believed that friendship can be very valuable if we approach others with empathy and compassion. Indeed, philosophers Bertrand Russell and Arthur Schopenhauer, I think, provide some illumination here. Russell and Schopenhauer both believed we should approach all people as our fellow sufferers. I know that sounds pessimistic, but the idea is that these great philosophers believed that life is difficult. We all encounter psychological pain, sometimes physical pain, and if we could see other people as sufferers, that might allow us to be more empathetic and compassionate, and that could lead to a better way of relating to other people. And I know Emerson agreed with that idea. Emerson does warn us that friendship is not possible with certain people. Friendship, he claimed, is not possible with people lacking integrity and love. His own words: "Be admonished not to strike leagues of friendship with cheap persons, where no friendship is possible." Here, Emerson sounds a little bit like the Buddha. The Buddha said this: "There is no companionship with a fool. There is no companionship with a fool." And what did the Buddha mean by a fool? Again, he meant somebody lacking integrity and lacking love. The Buddha also said this, and I know Emerson would agree with this: it is better to travel on alone than with a fool for a companion. Another quote from Emerson, which provides some illumination about his ideas on relationships. He said this: as we are, so we associate. The good by affinity seek the good. The wicked by affinity seek the wicked. He went on to say this: thus of their own volition, souls proceed into heaven, into hell. Since Emerson wrote a lot about relationships, it raises the question, what did he have to say about marriage? Emerson was married for most of his adult life. His first marriage ended after a year and a half when his wife died. He later remarried, and his second marriage lasted more than 40 years, indeed until his death. His second wife outlived him. Emerson's ideas on marriage evolved. When he was younger, he seemed more skeptical about it. But as he grew older, indeed late in life, he talked about how satisfying his marriage was. But let me give you some words again from Emerson. These words were written when he was in middle age. He says this: is not marriage an open question when it is alleged from the beginning of the world that those outside the institution wish to get in, and those inside the institution wish to get out? He then continued and mentioned that Socrates' reply to a young man who had once asked Socrates, should I get married, seems reasonable. And what was Socrates' response to the young man who asked him whether it's wise to get married? Socrates said this to the young man. He said, whether you choose a wife or not, you will regret it. I guess the idea is the grass is always greener in the other pasture. I must add, though, as I indicated before, that Emerson, late in life, talked about how satisfying his marriage was, even though, I must tell you, his life involved much tragedy. Indeed, during his second marriage, his 5-year-old son, Waldo, died. And both Emerson and his wife went into a pretty serious depression as the result of the death of their 5-year-old. According to Emerson, what's the most reliable way to get happiness from our interactions with other people? Well, Emerson believed kindness, compassion, and being of service to other people are essential if we are going to have good relationships with others. The idea is, make others happier, and one will make oneself happier. Another important theme of Emerson's lectures and essays was self-reliance. Indeed, if you are going to read even just one essay that Emerson wrote, I suggest you read his essay entitled Self-Reliance. I'm going to provide a few main ideas from it now, but in a later program, I intend to devote most of the program, if not all, to this single essay again, entitled Self-Reliance. Emerson believed that we must rely on ourselves and not others for most of our happiness. Indeed, with regard to marriage, Emerson believed that people often have unrealistic expectations about marriage. He believed, for example, that we should not believe that any one person can gratify all our needs and desires. And if we go into marriage with that idea, that our husband, our wife, can gratify all of our needs and desires, we will be very much disappointed. Indeed, Emerson believed it's unfair to expect someone to do that. Emerson believed that while other people can be sources of happiness, they are also sources of unhappiness. Indeed, Emerson believed that other people are more likely to be sources of unclear thinking than clear thinking. Why so? Well, Emerson believed that most people don't have very much wisdom. And as a consequence, since he believed this, he believed that other people are more likely to confuse us, for example, about what constitutes a successful life than to help clarify our thoughts about what constitutes a fulfilling life. I have little doubt that if Emerson were alive today, he would claim that among the serious obstacles, enemies indeed, to clear thinking in America today are the advertising industry, the television industry, and the movie industry. How so? How can these industries be enemies to clear thinking? Well, these industries, in a certain sense, condition people about what constitutes a successful life. And so often, the version that the advertising industry and the television and movie industries give us as to what constitutes a successful life, according to Emerson and so many of the great thinkers in history, doesn't live up to what it really should be. In other words, what I'm suggesting is these industries often give people a false account of what constitutes the good life. For example, the advertising industry offers us identity enhancers. I love that expression, identity enhancers. What does that mean? Well, the advertising industry often tells us that if we wish to increase our self-esteem and our happiness, it's important to buy a lot of things. Yes, things can help us to achieve greater self-esteem and happiness. The idea is that one's sense of self is bound up with one's possessions. Again, the idea is that one's possessions determine whether one is inferior or superior to other people. In other words, the idea is that one's status and identity have nothing to do with virtue, with kindness, with compassion, with moral courage. Can you imagine if social status were based on positive character traits instead of money and possessions? What a revolution this would cause in who's at the top of the social order and who's at the bottom of the social order. Again, I'm suggesting to you, if people's status and identity were based on positive character traits such as integrity, instead of how much money and possessions we have. Again, what a revolution this would cause in the hierarchy of social status. For example, one can imagine how many prominent entertainers, politicians, athletes, lawyers, and yes, even some phony intellectuals would find themselves near the bottom of the social hierarchy, while many people of very modest means and possessions would find themselves at the top of the social hierarchy. Isn't it ironic that the United States is a very religious country relative to other countries, and yet it seems the majority of people in America are likely to be more impressed with somebody's possessions than with their virtue? Emerson put it this way, and I'm quoting him. The majority measure their respect for each other by what each has and not by what each is. Again, people measuring their respect for other people based on what other people have and not what other people are. Apparently, the United States is a very religious country and a very materialistic country. Is that ironic? What do you think? Can a country's people be very materialistic and very spiritual? Again, the question, can a country's people be at the same time very materialistic and very spiritual? What would Jesus and the Buddha say about that? What do you think? Mother Teresa claimed it is not unusual that a rich country be spiritually impoverished. Carl Jung, the very famous psychiatrist, whose father incidentally was a minister, had some very critical words about Christian civilizations, some biting criticisms of the Christian civilizations in the world. Jung died, by the way, around the year 1960. Here are psychiatrist Carl Jung's own words. And again, they're pretty powerful. Christian civilization has proved hollow to a terrifying degree. It's all veneer. The inner man has remained untouched and therefore unchanged. Jung went on to say this: the Christian in his soul has not kept pace with his external beliefs. Again, the Christian in his soul has not kept pace with his external beliefs. I mentioned that one of Emerson's very important themes is self-reliance. And according to Emerson, self-reliance involves thinking for oneself. One must learn to think for oneself and not let the advertising, television, and movie industries think for oneself, or even one's brother-in-law or one's clergy person. If there is anything that one takes away from reading Emerson, it's the idea that we must learn to think critically and to think independently. I think the great poet Walt Whitman provides some illumination here on the subject of critical thinking. Walt Whitman said the following: "Re-examine all you have been told in school or church or in any book, and dismiss what insults your soul." I suspect if Whitman were alive today, he might rephrase it in a certain sense and might say the following: re-examine all you've been told by the advertising, television, and movie industries, and dismiss what insults your soul. Another important theme of Emerson's lectures and essays was education. Indeed, one of his most famous essays is entitled On Education. Emerson was a critic of education, even of Harvard, from which he had 2 degrees, which I mentioned earlier. Emerson said this on the subject of education. He said, "Colleges can only serve us when they aim not to drill, but to create." Let me say that again. Colleges can only serve us when they aim not to drill, but to create. I think the poet William Butler Yeats provides some illumination about what Emerson is saying here. Yeats put it this way: education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. Let me repeat that, and then I'll try to explain it as best as I can. Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. What Emerson and Yates are both saying is, when we educate young people, for example, we should not look upon them primarily as vessels to be filled with information, but rather we should ask people, in education, we should ask people thought-provoking questions so that people acquire not only knowledge, but people acquire some important ideas about how to live a satisfying life, a fulfilling life. So the idea is, it's not enough in education to provide information, to provide knowledge. We must help people to jump the gap from memorizing to critical thinking. Again, to jump the gap from memorizing to critical thinking about life's important issues, and again, what we can all do to live more fulfilling lives. Emerson provides more illumination on education in this quotation. The purpose of education is not primarily to produce doctors, teachers, engineers, and architects, but rather to produce great-hearted people. Emerson believed the test of a person's education was this: is the person able to think critically, to think independently? And does the person have a good heart? Does the person have empathy and compassion for all of his fellow human beings? And thirdly, is the person committed to treating other people justly? Emerson claimed that no matter how many degrees one has, if one is not committed to treating other people justly, one is not well educated. I'll have much more to say about this next week. But as is my custom, I'd like to end with a quotation from Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau believed we are all artists. In Waldo, his masterpiece, he penned the following words: "To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts."